Welcome to the program. Salaries and wages are lawful earnings of civil servants who accomplished a statutory schedule within the ambit of defined laws and labor regulations at the end of a specific period, which is usually determined by the employers. Universal labor laws, which are subject to review depending on the peculiarities of individual countries and resources available to meet growing demands of workers and ensure equilibrium in the pay structure. Nigerian labor organizations have remained committed in the struggle for a better salary structure, which led to the constitution of several committees to look into their demands with appropriate measures initiated to address the burning issues, as there is utmost urgency to correct disparity between wages of regulatory agencies and other agencies of government. Although attempts have been made to address this disparity in the past by previous administrations, but lacked the political will, commitment, and sincerity of purpose to carry it through. But hope is not lost, as recently the federal government announced plans to harmonize structures in line with global best practices to save the country of wastages arising from avoidable disparity in the jumbo salary scale of some ministry departments and agencies. But it is not enough to think only of harmonizing salary structure. It must be a component of economic and social re-engineering, as other tools have to complement the policy. In other words, good governance and sustainable economic development must vigorously be pursued by governments to enable harmonization of salaries serve its purpose. How can this be achieved? Well, tonight on the program, we'll be focusing on these and more as we discuss salary harmonization for better economy. I am Omini Odan. First, let's take this background put together by Austin Anyebe.
Institutions of government are established to accomplish specific goals, and to achieve these goals, the human resource is seen as the most crucial factor. To retain human resource, payment of relatively good monthly salaries and allowances, provision of car, housing and furniture loan facilities, and regular promotion are held to, or which Nigerian government has been committed to in the public service as contained in the yearly national budget. For instance, out of the more than 13 trillion naira budget for the 2021, the federal government personnel costs, pensions and gratuities account for 33% of the budget, which is put at 4.262 trillion naira, meaning the cost of governance remains a cause for concern. But more worrisome is the disparity in the salaries of civil servants from one ministry to another, which has for years impacted negatively on the morale of some workers. It is not unusual to find that the salary of an individual from certain agencies or parastatals of the federal government being twice that of what other persons in another ministry on the same grade level in another end. This, economists said, is unjustifiable and leads to corrupt tendencies among workers, saying they have raised the need for government to give equal priority to all workers in public agencies and institutions to encourage productivity.
Corruption, we all know, has always been the problem of this country. How do you stamp out corruption when a staff working in one particular agency is aware that the other staff in the other parastatal or agency is higher than him and they are on the same level? And of course, they buy from the same market. So, in this area, you discover that the one that is disadvantaged needs to cut corners to be able to meet up with his family demand, with the demand of the society, and the expectation of course, where he lives.
It is in a bid to address the issue of disparity in salaries. The federal government in 2020 mandated the National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission to begin implementation of a project to harmonize salaries disparity among ministries, departments, and agencies.
I feel sorry for those in the ministries, parastatals that are disadvantaged. We see these things every day. For instance, a man from Ministry A who come sign a deal with us, whereby either through our direct social mortgage arrangement for them to acquire the houses, the man is able to sign an agreement with us, and we hand over the keys to such person. Then happily he now brings in his friend who works in another agency of the federal government and say, come, there is a real estate company that have been able to address my challenge, my accommodation challenge. And then the other man comes along. I bet, unfortunately, when we profile the friend, and then we discover that he cannot, looking at his pay, vis-a-vis the provision of this gear-up ratio.
The Minister of Labour and Employment, Chris Ngige, at various fora during negotiation with labour unions, told them that President Muhammad Buhari has mandated a presidential committee on salaries and wages to review and realign the earnings of employees of ministries, departments and agencies of government with the aim to check disparity in salaries and wages as well as reduce costs of governance. The minister noted that in examining the disparity, the committee will have regard to the qualifications of employees and their stipulated workload in relation to their counterparts across various MDAs. This was re-echoed recently by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, at a public forum where she said harmonization of salaries and wages of civil servants across MDAs has to be carried out as part of government's plan to cut down costs of governance. Considering the fact that this issue has been raised several times in the past and nothing has been done, how soon will this exercise be? How would the review of the grading system be to achieve an enduring harmonization of workers' salaries and wages across the MDAs? These and more questions will be answered by guests on the program in Abuja. Austin Anyebe, NTA News.
Austin Anyabe's background sets the tone for the takeoff of the program tonight, and the focus once again is salary harmonization in Nigeria. It's Tuesday Live, as usual. At some point, our phone lines will be displayed on the screen, and if we're told to you, please, in making your contributions, turn down the volume of your television set to avoid the hallback or echo. Also tonight, you can be part of the conversation through our Twitter handle at Tuesday Live NTA. Also, in sustaining the conversation tonight, we have a couple of reports dotting the landscape of parts of the country, all in keeping faith with issues around salary harmonization in the country, talking about across-board federal, state, and local government councils in the country. Well, I'm being joined in the studio and via Zoom by a couple of guests. We begin tonight by introducing Acting Chairman, Salaries and Wages Commission, Mr. Ekpo Nta. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Ben Akabweze, Director General, Budget Office of the Federation, Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. It's good to have you on the program.
My pleasure.
Also invited to be on the program tonight is the President, Nigerian Labour Congress, Ayuba Waba. We invited him, but up to now, he's here to show up on the program. We hope, as the program progresses, President of NLC will be on the program, because in all these, they were very, very critical and they were fully involved in the entire process. Joining us via Zoom also is the development economist, Professor Ken Ife. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Much for inviting me.
Okay. We hear also, as the program progresses, we have other guests we introduce as soon as the signals come up tonight. Where we begin? Let me begin with okay, I hear one of the guests' signals is up. Director and Head Membership Service, Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, NECA, a journal via Zoom in Lagos, Mr. Adewale Oyirinde. Good to have you on the program tonight. Okay, we'll begin. Let me begin with the Director General Budget Office of the Federation, because somehow you have a link with the Federal Ministry of Finance. And this whole thing, let's do a recap. We're asking the Presidential Committee on Salaries and Wages has the mandate to review and realign earnings of employees of ministries, agencies, and parastatals, also to check disparity in the payment of salaries and wages, as well as prune the running cost of governance. Looks huge. Can you break it down?
Well, basically, personnel costs have increasingly become a significant portion. Indeed, personnel costs represents the single highest cost element on the government's budget. Currently, if you look at the 2021 budget, it's about 1/3. But then that's on the in terms of cost. It's worse when you relate it to revenues. So when you have a situation as in last year, when your personnel cost starts running above 70% of your entire revenues, then you need to basically look at it, because that sort of level is not sustainable. Of course, the first thing to do is not to try and cut this risk or whatever. Ultimately, what you need to do is focus on the revenues, and that's why government's principal focus is on how to grow the revenues. But growing revenues is not, it's not like flicking a light switch. It's hard work, it's tough work, especially at a time when the economy is going through a downturn. And so while focusing on fixing the revenues, you've got to look at your cost elements and see how you can contain them. And it's in that context that there is a focus on personnel costs. The first line of, in terms of the focus on personnel costs is to make sure that we're only paying what we need to pay. That we're only paying people who are actually on our payroll, and that they're only getting paid what they are duly entitled to. And so that's why government, mandated, across full implementation of the IPs, the integrated, personnel and payroll information system across all, sectors and agencies of government. And that's why, despite the resistance being mounted by, people like the, ASU and all of that, government was steadfast that this is needful, because we needed to first, eliminate, put behind us the, the phenomenon of ghost workers, and make sure not only are people, only people who are duly employed getting paid, but that people are also getting paid what they were entitled to. So that's the first line. The next line, of course, then is, given the continuing pressures, and in some cases deservedly, for better remuneration, especially if a government that is meant to fight corruption. If people are not paid livable wages, it's going to be tough to fight corruption. So it's in that context that government was now looking at, these, this, and what it threw up is the wide disparity that your reporter highlighted between, wages across the board in different agencies. Again, in addressing that, the first line is to even make sure that some of these agencies that are reputed to be earning so much more, that they're actually earning what they, are rightfully entitled to, and what it's shown, and I'm sure that the chairman, Income and Wages Commission will speak more to that, is that because, as you know, NSIWC is by law mandated to fix or at least sign off on is paid by every government agency, regardless of whether you're a revenue generating agency and whether you're self-funded. You still need to sign off on what you pay. And what is being shown is that there are several cases of people paying themselves above what NSIWC has signed off to. So again, that's the first point. So you can't, through harmonization, legalize an illegality. So the first thing is to make sure everybody is earning what they're legally entitled to, and then see how much disparity remains.
When you say NSIWC, it's an acronym, right? Which agency is this?
National Salaries, Income and Wages Commission.
Okay, that's the full meaning of that.
Yes,
exactly. But I agreed, you have talked about legality and illegality. Livable wages, pay what we need to pay, duly entitled. Our concern, before I come to the acting chairman, is why the disparity? Why?
No, first of all, there's always going to be some disparity, and some of it is justifiable. Not every job.
The point is, sorry,
not every job is the same.
The argument is this:
Yes.
one, if we say minimum wage,
Yes.
take home pay, basic salary, it cuts across, and we look at peculiarity, and by the argument, it said the peculiarity should be scientific enough so that the disparity in peculiarity should not be much. But in this case, you find clear-cut disparity in basic salaries, clear-cut disparities in peculiarities. That is the worry.
Well, you know, one approach to setting salaries in the public service is to have a uniform basic salary and then have the allowances differentiate. But that's only one approach.
And that's
It
the
is
concern.
also- it
Why
is also
are we not
valid
having
to have-
a uniform basic salary
I'm saying
and maybe
it is, also,
peculiarity?
it is also valid to have, you know, differential basic salaries depending on whether it's. But in any case, in our own case, government operates a consolidated salary structure. So the original concept of basic salary really in the public service no longer applies.
Okay, we'll come to that. Let me leave it there. Now, acting chairman, in all this, where legally or otherwise, I love what the DG said, you must earn it legally, not illegally, even if we smart it. When we hear disparity in salary, your office, the National Salaries and Wages Commission, comes into play. It looks as if it begins and ends with you. How do you operate?
Well, I'm happy you raised the issues of disparity. If you look at the long journey that salaries administration has gone through in this country, say by 1974, you had over 300 different salary structures. And when it was consolidated to the harmonized salary structure, it was addressing the issues that you have raised. But the first group that threw a stick into the entire mix was the university sector that said, look, we don't have the kind of regular hours that those in the MDAs have, 8 to 5. We have a fluid process. Lecturers are not confined within those processes, so we want to come out of that structure. And government set up committees, and eventually they were taken out of the structure. That was followed immediately by the medical and health sector, and gave reasons. So you started that whole process again to about 35, after streamlining everybody to about 35, and then they started getting out again. And each group gave convincing reasons why they should not be earning the same thing like you. And committees were set up to look at all those processes. Ad hoc committees, so to speak, until we have arrived at what we now know as the consolidated salary structure, which he mentioned. And you have about 13. And these 13 structures are grouped around services and functions and sectors, such that you have those who are regulators, you have those who are, say, in engineering, medical and health, services, and the like. So each of these sectors, you might have an engineer working, for example, in NNPC. You would also have an engineer working in Ministry of Works. So you're looking at relativity, you're also looking at parity, you're also looking at scope of work in determining what each sector should earn. And eventually, what came into play was collective bargaining, which is a principle of the ILO. which gives the worker the right to negotiate his pay with government, represented by unions. And of course, you have to decide two other basic things. Are you treasury funded, which means that the government is paying 100% of your salaries, you're not bringing anything onto the table in terms of finances? Or are you 100% independent and can fund your salaries and allowances? Or are you a semi-organization that has both elements, treasury funded, and you have IGR to support what you're doing? So it's not something that you sit down and say, okay, look, everybody is going to earn the same basic salaries and take the same peculiar allowances. And when these kind of arguments come up, I tend to look at the private sector. Even within the private sector, all private sector agencies earning the same? They are not. And so when we're talking about harmonization, the first reaction is that if you don't understand what harmonization means in the context of salary administration, it's like, okay, we're going to bring everybody together. But if you look at our act, harmonization is actually looking at public sector, private sector, and trying to create a situation where they're all moving closer to each other. I'll give you a very clear example. Most private sector organizations are earning more than the public sector employees. But if you look at the health sector, it's one sector where I can tell you that the public sector employees are actually better off than the private sector. People don't avert their minds in that direction. You mentioned livable wages. Yes, that's the whole essence of this discussion. And that's how come the national minimum wage is a factor you use, that nobody should live below this level. And it's reviewed when it is appropriate. It's applicable in different countries. Some countries take it on the basis of collection of states. Our own country is that it cuts across states at the federal level too. So these are part of the processes that you have to look at when you are looking at the disparities. As we go on, we would begin to understand why you have the concerns that you actually raised those concerns.
Absolutely.
Yes, and we've also heard that why should X, who I graduated with, earn this when I am earning this, if we're all in the public sector? Somebody does not even bring in, why is the same classmate of mine who is in the private sector earning even 3 times what the highest public sector employee is earning? You all left from the same process. I remember having this discussion with the NUJ chapel in Calabar 2 weeks ago. And a journalist was very upset why somebody else should be earning more than he was earning. And I said, I don't have issues with everybody earning the same thing. In which case, I think I will make a case for you to be transferred to the military, to help the military in the fight in the Northeast. He said, no, that's a very dangerous job. And I said, we're talking about the same salary structure that you're concerned about. He said, okay, I think I can review it a bit. So it's not something that we should look at with emotions. It's scientifically derived, and committees have been set up. And I'd like to, at this point, state that the salaries, the National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission, is not really a government agency like most people think. It's a tripartite organization. You have government representatives, you have labor, and you have the Nigerian NECA. So every interest is represented.
Okay. Chairman, let me just hold you.
Yes.
I'll come back to you. You have raised very deep issues that will sustain this conversation, and I would have loved maybe to start an argument. I'll get to that, because when you say public sector, private sector, when you look at even the public sector, I understand why there should be disparities between local government, state, and federal. Clearly, we will get to that.
No, let me even help you before you go too further. If you go to the UK, the equivalent of local governments, some local governments pay higher than the central government.
Okay, we'll come to that.
Sure.
Let's go to Professor Kenife, General Advisor. Professor Kenife, listening to the Director General Budget Office of the Federation and the Acting Chairman of the National Salaries and Income Wages Commission, Ekponta, speak in their opening thoughts, comparatively, it is said it is not enough to think only of harmonizing salary structure. It must be a component of economic and social re-engineering as other tools to have a complementary posture. How do you react to the openings?
Many factors at play when it comes to harmonizing and aligning. The fact that you want to align or harmonize doesn't mean you want to come out and equal pay across the board. My colleague was just about to draw to. Within UK, you would not believe that the head teacher in a primary school 10 years ago was any more salary, much higher salary than the vice chancellor of the university. I'm telling you, it just tells you how difficult it is to recruit a British government granted, what do you call it, this visa, work permit. You know, they are very generous on work permit if you are going to teach at the primary level. Although in US, it's a more different, it's a bit more about health. The discrepancy is inevitable when you look at all factors surrounding what's the definition of wage? Wage is a price that you pay for services that are rendered. And so it's a much fluid and relative concept. The grace there is that labor union have the grace to use collective bargaining to sort their ways out in any particular context. But there are common denominators such as the cost of living. So that's common. The cost of living and what inflation could mean to the salary that you are earning. The government legislation provides a bottom line. It provides minimum wage to say, look, this is a starting point. It also legislation talks about equal pay for equal work. Once you get that in, it begins to close the gap, because you are now saying, look, if you have equal pay, you have to be for equal work. So you begin to find some way in which you can be, and then may even see where the gap really widens very significantly. Even if you try to bring the base together, they will mean different things. If you look at FIRS gets a different proportion of the revenue they collect to a cost of loans. And also you have the supply and demand issue when they play out in this area. How much labor? You see, incidentally, you cannot do the supply demand curve for each job. It's difficult. If you employ 1,000, the demand curve in the labor market and the supply curve to determine the equilibrium where you can say, okay, that is the appropriate salary for this particular staff. So it varies. And then the way it varies within the company, it also will vary across the various agencies. Productivity issue, which is the crux. The productivity will say, right, normally I would expect to pay higher wage if I am getting lower costs. So people will say, okay, well, if you can drive down the cost by, because I'm likely to get more surplus. So that again it enters into that equation. And there are many other factors. You look at the qualification, the worker's experience, relative experience, because the experience varies, going rate in the market. You lose the labor to other competitors. So again, that is a bit subjective because it is a competitive force within the industry. And again, it varies from industry to industry, may compensate. If you look at NTA that we are talking to now, and then how do you compare the long hours that the staff of NTA do, 12 hours instead of 8 hours, the health risk, the exposure to radiations, is when they retire, what's the health and longevity issues, they have the late nights. Some of you finish this your program by 12:30 midnight. How are you going to get home? Are you going to have a bus to take you home? If you are coming from Waraba, what is the cost? And then how many sociable hours? How much are they pay for sociable hours? Normally in UK, we pay you twice your salary for sociable hours, and then also overtime. So when you just take one company and then check, gauge it against, they're not comparing like to like. And there are many things that enter into that calculus. Thank you.
I hope and believe our engineers will try to rectify the audio signals coming from there. They are not very smooth, so that we'll get audible and clearer audio from that end. Mr. Erin, they join us via Zoom. Please, we'll get to you. I'm glad to announce that the president of Nigerian Labour Congress, Comrade Ayuba Bawa is here with us. Good to see you on the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're worried that you didn't come because when the pronouncement was made by the federal government that there will be review of workers' harmonization, the reaction came from NLC countering it. It took the likes of DG Budget, Office of the Federation, and the Minister of Finance to explain to Nigerians what that meant. Now, since then and now, what is the position of Labour regarding government stand on review and harmonization of wages, of salaries of wages of workers?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think the way the information was reported, arising from a statement made by the Minister of Finance, is to effect that salaries are going to be reviewed downward. And I think many of the media platforms reported that. And we thought that in this very challenging period, what should be considered is even enhancement. And I think the position of Labour was very clear because we were not consulted. And I know that in the issues of salary or the issues of how to harmonize salary certainly is a core Labour issue. And I thought that we should be consulted, we should be part of the process because in the past, when such exercises are carried out, Labour is carried along, especially those unions that represent the public sector unions. Because in the public sector, we have the Joint Public Service Negotiating Council that negotiates on behalf of all public sector workers. We have also secretarial platforms, just as we have in the health sector, we have in the education sector. All those secretarial unions have their collective bargaining platforms, which needed to be consulted before carrying out such an exercise. Let me also say that this is not the first time we are trying to look at the issue of harmonizing salary, because I remember before the current salary structures, because presently in the public service we have about 13 different salary structures. I think about 13 different salary structures. And therefore those salary structures in some cases, they are product of collective bargaining. I know, for instance, those in the university sectors were products of collective bargaining. Those in the health sector, we have two in the health sector, the medical salary structure and the health salary structure. All of them are products of collective bargaining. I also know that in some other establishments, like the one we have in Central Bank and NMPC, in most cases, because the president is also the minister of petroleum, such agreements, once concluded in-house, will be sent to him for approval before he's now registered with the Salaries, Income and Wages Commission. So basically, those are some of the issues that we need to understand them and know where we are going, and also carry labor along so that we can know where we are going. Where is the issue? Because yes, there is the principle of equal pay for work of equal value. In a sector, it's expected, it's an ILO standard, that there should be equal pay for work of equal value, or for people that are on the same grade level. There should be a way that remuneration can have some empirical basis. But I think in the context of Nigeria, we have not used in the past empirical basis. And even in the same sector, like we have in the health sector, the agitation and argument have been, what are the bases that we have used to actually arrive at some allowances or even adjust salary structure, where you have somebody on grade level 10, and because the cadres are different, somebody is earning higher than another. And also, I think the issue has to do with the low wage system occasioned by the continuous falling value of our currency. That is a major issue, because whether you like it or not, the wage is not even something to take somebody home. So the wage is so low now because of the falling value of our currency. If I try to recap where we are some 30, 40 years ago, the minimum wage was 125 naira. It was more than $125. Now the minimum wage is about $60. So if you look at the quantum, yes, the quantum is big, 30, but 125 was more than that 30. So I think these are some of the issues that we need to understand, and I think also labor need to be carried along so that we are on the same page to understand where we are going to. Because there is difference between low wages, which is actually an issue. In the core civil service, I can say the wages are too low when you compare to some agencies of government. But I also know that those processes are processes that have undergone some process of negotiation. And let me say that this is not the first time. Before these current salary structures, about 13 of them, we have what we refer to as harmonized public service salary structure, which was one in the public service. I also know that in the tertiary institutions, we call it HATIS, Harmonized Tertiary Institution Salary Structure. But along the line, those issues also came with their own challenges. And in different sectors, there were agitation. Before now, that issue of harmonization collapsed, and we are where we are today. So basically, I think it's to understand where we are going to, what are the issues that we need to understand, and therefore to also get the buy-in of everybody, because workers work to earn a living. They don't just work. I expect that when I work, I should be able to take care of my family, take care of my immediate needs. That's what salary is supposed to do. And so despite the challenge we are in, we should recognize all these issues that are now on the table. And importantly also, side by side with the humongous salary being earned by politicians. Most of the times people say workers are just minute 5%. What percentage is our political elites? Some of them have very humongous severance packages. Outside what has been approved by Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission, they collect something that is humongous, has no basis, has no international standard, has no global standard. It's a Nigerian standard. So I think we must be holistic. Yes, we have difficulty.
Okay.
Challenges occasioned by the COVID-19. There is difficulty in the, but when you look at the size of the budget and you begin to look at what amount constitutes actually personal cost, it's because the value of our currency have fallen.
Okay. Let me hold it there, President. Thanks for your opening thought. Let's go to Mr. Adewale Oyerinde. He's joining us via Zoom from Lagos. Well, you have listened to the guests via Zoom and in Abuja. Let's get your opening thoughts too before we go to specifics. Oh, I hear it's not available. Now, let's continue. Acting Chairman, I'm happy you raised a fundamental issue and others have sustained. DG Budget Office, Treasury funded, IGR backed. I understand that when you talk about harmonization, issues of wages, you need to really calm down and do a lot of explanations, because really, the man on the stool don't understand why, like the acting chairman, Wages and Salaries Commission is talking about, somebody working, an engineer working in the core ministry, or an engineer working in NTA, or an engineer working in NNPC, why in the public service at the federal level, why his basic salary, for instance, should be higher than the engineer or journalist working here? What is the basis of that? If you say treasury funded, IGR backed, for instance, NTA is treasury funded, IGR backed. NNPC, is it treasury funded or IGI backed? And what really is the basis for this disparity? That's what we want to understand.
Well, thank you. First, I think I need to clarify the president of NLC, my fellow comrade. Sure, he doesn't agree. Is right that harmonization must involve labor. But I think it's important to set the record straight where we are in that process. It's still a very preliminary stage where we are collating information within the public service as to what is actually being paid agency by agency. You know, that's not a job for, but we have our own job to do when we've done basically some of the groundwork, and then there's a basis for engagement. I'm sure that labor will be engaged. And ultimately, of course, NSIWC, where labor is really represented, will be an active part of this process. So there's no, thing to be anxious about that. But yes, you talked about treasury funded, and you cited the example of NTA and NNPC. NTA government pays your salary fully. Not only does government pay your salary fully, you also retain all of the revenues that you generate and you spend it. And, when it comes to your capital expenditure, government funds it. You've got businesses all over the country. Government basically, did that, you don't. But in your industry, you've got competition just like the private sector, where they have responsibility to pay their people, to raise their own capital, borrow, pay interest and all of that, and cover their costs, and pay their people well. So really, because as pointed out earlier, harmonization is not just within the public sector, but has to look at the. So ultimately, okay, when you talk about what people pay, your capacity to generate the resources is a critical factor. When I was in Lagos State government, we negotiated with Labour back then what we call a labour policy. And if I recall correctly then, it said in any particular period, the cap on personnel cost will be either 25% of government's total revenues or 35% of the internally generated revenues, whichever is higher. When you take that sort of approach, you create harmony between the goals of the employer and the employee. Everybody recognizes that if we increase the revenues, if we grow the revenues, then we have a stake in it. We can, whatever this thing. At the federal level, there's no such thing. It's missing. There's no harmony between governments, the employer's objective and the employees. And sometimes that's the basis for friction. When the employer is saying, look, we don't have the resources, the employer says, I really don't care. All I know is what I'm getting paid is not high enough. You cited the example of NNPC. Yeah. NNPC, on the other hand, okay, isn't funded on the budget at all. They generate revenues. They are engaged in commercial activities, and so they pay they pay themselves from what they generate, and then they are supposed to remit a percentage. The Fiscal Responsibility Act is they are supposed to remit 80% of their operating surplus to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, which goes towards the pool of funds from which some other agencies, some of which are not by their nature, that not in the business of generating revenues. They provide services, but you can put even a commercial value on the services that they provide. Whether it be the people in education or the health sector, and even yourselves. There's some level of social service that you provide that is not billable.
Like what we are doing right now.
No, but I mean, what you're doing, even the private, TV stations also have public affairs programs like this, and they don't charge, so all of these are the same. But ultimately, as I said earlier, disparity is inevitable. It's just that the disparity must be equitable, must be justifiable. Skill, what are you paying for? You're paying for skill. And as Professor Kenife said earlier on, you can't run away from the laws of supply and demand. A skill that is in short supply necessarily will attract a higher. I recall again, just drawing from my example, the Lagos government. At a point, we found, look, Lagos State had the largest Oracle installation on the continent then. And so it was investing a lot in developing the manpower with these skills. But what used to happen is, because they were being paid civil service, whatever, when you train them, then some guys from the private sector, when they implement Oracle, they know where to get the skills, because again, when government is training, the private sector, when they're training, they're measuring the whatever. Government just goes all out, trains, funds, whatever. And they just come and offer these guys whatever and take them. So we had to create a special skills allowance for them to be able to keep them. So if all you bring to the table is generalist skill, generalist knowledge that is freely available on the street, the reality is you can't command premium price for that skill. Somebody else with it's the same logic. Why, as the chairman NSIWC said earlier, the health sector is the one sector where the public sector, level, pays higher than the private sector, because
Let's quickly go to the guests who has been waiting for us. When we were ready for him, he wasn't actually on set. Mr. Adewale Ojerinde, please just give us your contribution at this point. You have followed through, so that we maybe take our first line of reports, come back, sustain the conversation, and take some tweets and maybe phone calls.
Thank you very much for having us, and it's been a very incisive and interesting conversation. We'll look at it from the holistic perspective on harmonization, and while both concepts.
Sorry, Mr. Oyerinde, your audio is quite poor. Please, the engineers work on it and we get back to you. Please, just bear with us. At this point, we told our viewers at the beginning that we'll take a couple of reports. Let's begin with the report from Lagos, in keeping faith with the conversation tonight.
Among several objectives of establishing a company or a business venture is profit maximization. In addition to designing a blueprint to ensure steady profitability, a vibrant workforce of highly skilled personnel must be recruited with robust remuneration as motivation. With all parameters in motion, employers strive to expand the scope of operations. To thrive in the free market, adequately rewarding employees' commitment will boost productivity.
You align the interest of staff with that of the owners, or what you call, you are able to resolve the agency conflict that happens in business organizations when those who are driving the business are different from the owners. And because those who are driving the business want their interest to be furthered, it goes against the interest of those who are the owners, who are the residual beneficiaries of the performance of the company. So what we have done is to align those interests and ensure that people are paid enough for their effort on a monthly basis. People are promoted as at when due, exceptional performance are exceptionally rewarded, and then further cash reward in terms of bonus or share of profit is given to those who did very well based on their performance.
A scenario where there is disparity in income and mode of payment, Professor Ajibola submits that, given the scope of work handled by staff of the various ministries and agencies of government, salaries ought to reflect the current realities.
Where you have a common mandate that goes with key performance indicators, job security can also be threatened. So compensation follows this trajectory, the trajectory of what are my key performance indicators. How do I work around the clock to meet these indicators? And when I fail to meet these indicators, what becomes of my engagement in such an organization?
To sustain business operations and commitment of employees in both the public and private sectors, stakeholders agreed that proper remuneration stimulates better performance and service delivery.
The report from Lagos, and the next report coming from Port Harcourt says, besides the fact that the River State economy thrives around the petroleum and gas industry, it is also looking at how the measures put in place by the federal government will address the disparity in salaries of public servants and uplift the standard of living of the people and the economy. The report.
Rivers State is an oil-producing state, and most of the salary earners in the state receive their income based on the salary structure of these oil and gas companies. This has, to a large extent, affected the economic power of most of the residents, as goods and services are sold based on the purchasing power of these oil and gas company workers. The disparity also affects housing, electricity, healthcare delivery, amongst others, which does not take into account the fact that there are other low-income earners.
You have a huge quantity of liquid cash flowing into the market to chase the available goods. Demand in this case is now outweighing what? The supply. The question now is, those who are living on a fixed salary income, who are the civil service, what happens to them in this case? They are living on fixed income, but the prices of goods are increasing.
Going to the purchase market to get items, it becomes so difficult for some of us to meet up. And the prices are the same. Things to get are the same, but the salary, the income are not the same. And it now becomes so difficult for some persons to meet up. And that's why you see some persons working with the government, they have to do the shortcuts.
The reforms introduced by the federal government include trader money, farmer money, COVID-19 support grant, SME stimulus package, Empower, social investment program, and others. The measures put in place by the federal government to inject reforms that will address disparity will no doubt uplift the standard of living of the low-income earners as well as improve the economy.
Each participant to the economy that brings anything out, the share that goes to them is what we mean by distribution of income. And I'm saying that this distribution of income is just theory, because the neck of our problem is corruption.
Economic experts are, however, advocating income subsidy to effect even distribution of income.
Our next leg is a report from Enugu.
Over the years, the economic fortune of Enugu State has evolved into a major center for coal and iron ore mining, to agriculture as a civil service state. The bulk of government's revenue is gotten from federal allocation, with little from internally generated resources such as tax and other levies. Successive governments in the state have developed and sustained an economic strategy that has translated into effective management of resources. It is on record that the state government was one of the first and few that has implemented the 30,000 naira minimum wage for civil servants. The rate of productivity is usually dependent on demand, while demand growth varies with spending power which mostly lies in the hands of civil servants in the state. Public servants' wages is usually a major boost in various businesses in the state, as it affects sales and profit, as well as prices of goods and services.
The governor of this state says this repeatedly, that why he cannot afford to owe any worker is that the economy of this state is being piloted by the salaries of workers. It's a salaried state. If you remove workers, we don't have industries and all this and that. This state. Therefore, the state salary system is what pilots even private business firms in the state.
There is need for us to cut costs, but not worker salary. There are so many white elephant projects going on that they are not even adding value to this economy. They should cut down on such projects. They should think of better projects to do. Projects that have a direct impact, that will add value to the economy.
You will receive the same salary package at the end of the day with your counterparts in other agencies and departments or ministries. It will boost your morale.
The agriculture sector, which is another viable sector in the state's economy, has contributed immensely in the well-being of the people, which part of its growth can be attributed to civil servant salaries, considering that the state is predominantly a civil service state.
The reports there from Lagos, Port Harcourt and Enugu keeps us sustained in the conversation. Before we took the reports, let me quickly apologize to Professor Kenife and Oyerinde. These audio signals from your end are being worked on. As soon as that is done, we'll come back to the Zoom signals with you, please. Now, Chairman, before I took off and went to Professor Kenife, you tried to explain how the National Salaries, Income and Wages Commission operates in determining or trying to harmonize. You say it's not all about maybe your board. You have a representation across board. NSC chairman, president tried to touch on that too. Can you expatiate for that before we go to other areas?
Well, what I said there was that the commission is a tripartite body. You have government interest on one part. You have labor fully represented. In fact, the current board member representing labor is Comrade Issa Aremu, who is very well known. And he will not sit on a board where activities would not take into consideration the issues of equity to all parties. And then you have the organized employers. NECA, one of them is who was speaking here. So our board meetings are always very, very robust. And before we take decisions, we carry out surveys in order to enrich whatever we intend to present. I'll give you a clear example of one we had completed last year. We decided to do a remuneration survey of the health sector with special emphasis on private health facilities. We're looking at the earnings of medical doctors, dentists, physiotherapists, pharmacists, across board in the private sector. A number of years they spent in building up their practice. And we sent out our reports, the outcome of the survey, to stakeholders to make comments on. It was very instructive because the private sector itself was learning. We looked at the average lifespan of a medical doctor who sets up his private medical facility. Most people don't take time to look at those processes because by the time you spend all your initial takeoff process to build and put infrastructure in place, you already almost gotten out because you're taking loans from banks. And we looked at the cost of servicing those loans. And then we looked at the scarce skills involved. Almost all private health facilities that have to carry out operations don't have the capacity to pay full-time anesthesiologists in their employ. So they tend to go to the public hospitals to take these specialists to come and work for them. And then those ones go back. And part of our recommendation there was looking instead of running solo clinics and hospitals, why don't you run joint companies? But you see, we also found out that quite a number of these hospitals are actually owned by public sector health and medical personnel. So what are the consequences? And we build this into our processes when we're making negotiations. As I speak to you for this year, we're doing a remuneration survey of the tertiary education sector, and we're concentrating on the private education sector. What is the private university paying its lecturer? So that we can use that to look at what the person in the public sector is earning. What are the services being provided in the private sector? What is the discipline involved? If you don't go for lectures, what are the consequences? Do you have the same consequences in the public sector? A whole lot of processes are involved. We just don't sit down to make recommendations in the air. No, we don't. We also, I think in 2018, took out a survey on remuneration of the informal sector and looked at the different skills and professions in that sector and what are the problems that you listed. Quite a number of interventions by government, money, trader money and all that, and we're waiting to see the impact because we're going to do a study of that again, look at those processes. We also rely a lot on NBS, what comes out of their survey. If you don't do these things, because that's part of what we are required to do in order to be able to advise government. So when we're in negotiation meetings, that's why I'm very happy for those who have actually met labor when we're having these negotiations. This is not the labor of the past, where sentiments held sway. The labor in this country, in terms of education, in terms of the exposure, all the meetings of ILO, they are there. They are very, very skilled. And so if government is not going to match that skill, you begin to have those disparities you're talking about. That's why they were able to come out very fast to say, are you intending to reduce salaries? That's not our understanding of friendship. Okay. But when they also had the correct process, like he rightly said, harmonization is not a new thing. It's always been there and will continue to be there. It's something that goes on even in private sector, even in your home. You sent your children to foreign universities. When the dollar exchange rate started having some issues, you moved them from Europe to Dubai. Finally, they have moved back. Those who went to Ghana, because Ghana is charging foreign currency. And for those who have been studying the educational sector, that's why you now have an upsurge of private universities providing quality services that you feel happy to allow your wards and children. It's demand and supply and expertise. And I think, like the DG mentioned, when I talked about treasury-funded organizations, it wasn't meant to show that they were not performing or their value system is not as high as what, like he also rightly stated, if you put a cost on that, it should make whoever is working in any sector feel happy that is giving value for what he's doing, if he is giving value. Okay. But that's the key. Okay. And so we have decided to move ahead in the commission to look at productivity improvement schemes. Okay. Not you asking all the time, I want more money, I want more salaries, I want more allowances. I gave you an increase in 2012, and you want an increase in 2016. I want to be able to see and measure what value you have put that has improved the system, even if it is not bringing money. I should be able to reward you, to give you more incentive.
Okay, let me just hold you this up. We're hearing these signals are up now. I also take a question to the NLC president. Let's go to him. We're hearing it's beyond us here. Listening through, let's get your inputs now.
Am I clear?
You're clear. Go ahead, please.
All right. Thank you very much. I think the conversation has been quite interesting and quite incisive. I couldn't get from the comrade president, the NLC president, his comment, but from the bit I've heard, I think the fundamental issue for us is the issue of disparity, the issue of harmonization will continue to arise if we don't go back to the basics. And the basics is this. As is done in the private sector, most private sectors, look, what is the value of the job? Mm-hmm. And what we call the job evaluation. Let's look at the value of the job. Let's look at what exactly is the component of the job. Can compensation be based on the value that the job creates? At a point, there will always be disparity. It's something we cannot run away from, and we should be comfortable with the word disparity, because that we both started at grade level 1 in 2010 doesn't mean that we'll continue to be on the same grade and on the same salary 5-10 years later. A factor that will determine how far we move is ordinarily should be productivity. If I'm more productive, then ordinarily I should move faster and I should move further in the context of remuneration and salary or wages than any other person. So if we don't base this conversation of disparity and harmonization on the fundamental principle of productivity and also the value had, then we'll always be coming back to the issue of harmonizing and raising the issue of disparity. Every system should seek to be justiciable. Justice, equity should be a fundamental thing that all of us should mind. And in the context of equity, I mean equal pay for equal work. So what is happening, what from the conversation we've had, and what is happening in the public sector, where there are wide disparity from payment of salaries, intelligence, and different ministries, we only create one thing. It creates discontent. And discontent creates desperation. And when an employee is desperate, one of the things that suffers is his productivity. Not because he wants to be unproductive, but because the system around him has created a structure that doesn't encourage him to be productive. So for us, the first thing is, look, harmonization and disparity, they are not necessarily evil on their own, because they will always happen. But the fundamental principle of equity, equal for equal work, we must enshrine that. And also we must go back to the issue of defining the work. As I've mentioned, the issue of salary, surveys, and the rest. And one fundamental issue we should also notice this. If we do salary surveys cross-sectorally from one sector to the other, if you do salary surveys from one industry to the other, we probably will not get the actual figure that we should pay an employee if the foundation of those surveys is faulty, or if the foundation of the wages paid in those sectors that we surveyed, if they are faulty in the first place, then the result will probably be faulty. Because if the process is not right, then there is a very high tendency that the outcome will not right. So if I'm in sector A and sector B, the survey the salary in sector A, and the basis of the salary in sector A is not right from the beginning, then that survey will turn up an outcome that will be contentious. And if you do that cross-sectorally, the result we will get might not be representative of what actually should be paid per employee or per sector. So the first thing is this. I think we should, no matter how hard it takes, we should try and do the right thing. The first is, let's reevaluate the jobs. We've mentioned the issue of the risk involved, the qualification, the time spent in training. Those are beautiful factors. And while we are looking at those factors, you can also throw away the economic factor, the economic factor itself that affects all these jobs that we are talking about. So it's a whole gamut of things we have to look at if you are talking of harmonization. We don't pick it from the top. We want to harmonize from the top. While we left, or we are leaving the fundamental issue of actually defining those jobs, defining who is doing those jobs. If we don't do that, 5 years down the line, we'll still come back to the issue of disparity and also the issue of harmonization. In the private sector, as a round-off, what determines to a large extent is productivity. If you are productive, if you are adding value, then your chances of moving up the scale is very high. And we believe strongly that the salary scale, the grading scale in the service, is probably meant to address all this issue of disparity and the rest. What happened at the point, we cannot say. But it's very important that all stakeholders should go back. Let's reevaluate the jobs, even in the civil service, even in the private sector. Let's reevaluate those jobs. Let's get appropriate value for those jobs. If we deal with it empirically, then it becomes difficult for anybody to fault it. Sentiment is taken out of it. Political considerations is taken out of it. We can leverage on the MBS, Bureau of Statistics, that have data that to a large extent we can trust for whatever data that we need to start doing the right thing. If not, we'll go through this process in 2021, and then we look back in 2025 or 2030, and the same issue that we thought we have addressed in 2021 will still confront us, talking about disparity and also harmonization. So the basic thing we should do is let's reevaluate with all stakeholders. Let's do a proper reevaluation of all the jobs in the public sector and also the private sector, so that appropriate wages can be given to those that deserve it. Then disparity will evolve. Disparity will not be induced. When disparity is evolving, everybody can see it. All the employees can see it. That look, this is coming to me because of my contribution. This is not coming to me because of what I'm not contributing. And that way, you reduce the issue of discontent, you reduce the issue of desperation, employee will be motivated, and then the business will be better for it, and the economy itself will be better for it.
Besides just trying to look at the issue of disparity, we are also looking at one of the mandates the committee has is to also check the costs, personnel costs on the budget. We'll come to that with the NLC president when we return from the break. Stay with us.
For now, the best and most efficient way to avoid getting infected is through regular hygienic and sanitary practices, as well as social distancing. As individuals, we remain the greatest weapon to fight this pandemic. by washing our hands regularly with clean water and soap, disinfecting frequently used surfaces and areas, coughing into a tissue or elbow, and strictly adhering to infection prevention control measures in health facilities, we can contain this virus.
Coronavirus is real. Steps to avoid this pandemic. Wash your hands regularly or sanitize your hands. Keep social and physical distancing. Avoid crowded places. Stay at home unless absolutely necessary. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth if your hands are not clean. Avoid the spread of coronavirus. Coronavirus is real.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Thanks for staying tuned, and it is salary harmonization in Nigeria. Before we went on break, I were to look also still a bit, besides looking at the disparity, we are also looking at the costs to the economy. And by the breakdown I have here, President NLC, 70% annual budget on recurrent and 30% on capital is largely due to the lopsidedness in salary structure, as 10% of federal government workers consume more than 70% of the wage bill.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's also very critical we understand the structure of the public service. We have those that are essentially security, as the armed forces, the police. You have the health sector. You have the education sector. You have also the service sector, just as you have the NTA and other service utility sector. This is the structure of the public service. And therefore, as we speak, we are even saying that the number of our police and military personnel are not enough. Because looking at the population of 200 million, there is a ratio that can also provide adequate security for the population. So basically, I think what is lacking is how we can generate revenue that can be able to address these fundamental issues. That's actually what is the problem. And I can say clearly that that is where we have not gotten it right. So instead of just blaming the victim, who is the worker, who is doing his best, I think we should be able to look at fundamental issues that we need to do to address this challenge. So basically, I think it's the issue of revenue, which I think there are a lot of loopholes in our revenue system. You have heard of many, many news. People come and take our oil. It's not even accounted for. And you only see them on the books of those companies outside the country, but on our books, they will say there is vandalization and therefore oil have not been sold. So a lot of these challenges and leakages, which I think is the issue we need to address. But if we are looking at just the quantum of how much is being consumed with our population, I can tell you that workers are underpaid when you compare with other climes. And I must tell you the fact that there are things that we must also do. We must retain our best hands. Nigerians are so entrepreneurial. Nigerians all over the world are making waves. But we are training them and losing them. Take, for instance, the health sector. Before the lockdown, I was in Petersburg. I visited a private hospital. Could you believe that in that same week, 4 Nigerian nurses were employed in that hospital? As they were arriving, they have cars, they have houses. In fact, I visited the house of one. And in their own case, people are paid on the basis of the fact that they are expertise. There is this issue of demand and supply, which I agree with. But in our case, we don't have basis. In that hospital, nurse can even collect higher than a doctor. Because if you're a surgeon, and in a month you do not perform five surgery, there is the basis that you'll be paid. But other added specialist allowances that you need to earn, you will not earn it. And they were even telling me that when they have their off duties, because they want to earn more, they go to the hospital to work. And therefore, they are earning more. So these are some of the bases that we don't have. And therefore, we are just blaming the victim. Workers are the victim in this particular case. There are many things we can do to fix the challenge that we have now. And basically, it's about how we fix our revenue and get people to be paid well. It's not also going to add up if people are working and they cannot be able to take care of their families. And we now say, oh, they are consuming more. They are consuming more. I made the analysis. If you put together these earnings of our political elites, from councillor to the highest office in the land, if you put it together, I'm sure it will also consume humongous amount of. So I think it's also good to look at this amount so that we can be able to, because those very key services, some of them don't generate revenue. But even for the economy to do well, because the primary purpose of governance is about the security of the people. And therefore, this particular segment that I'm talking about will have to provide security for all of us. Whatever they consume, you cannot say it's a waste. Or you are looking at our teachers in the health in the education sector. In the best economies around the world, those that are rating very high in education, they have 4 teachers per classroom of not more than 40 or 30 students. Finland, if you look at the current indices, global indices, Finland is leading. So they have 4 teachers in one classroom. Okay. Whereas in our universities, you have 1 lecturer to about 1,000 students.
Okay, let's take our first caller tonight before we come back to other issues, because the DG Budget Office is also waiting to react to it. Hello, Ibrahim is calling from Ilorin, our first caller tonight. Hello, Ibrahim. Ibrahim, please, could you turn down the volume of your television set, please? Hello, Ibrahim. Please. Please go ahead. But could you turn down the volume of the television set, please? Go ahead, please. We can hear you. So we lost that caller. Well, DG, I'll also love you to contribute on the issue of cost to the economy in terms of personal costs before we take some of the tweets that have come.
Well, you know, I'm actually in agreement with the president of NLC. In my career, I've spent about two thirds of my career in the private sector, and the last third in the public sector. 20 years ago, I was managing director of a bank. My salary 20 years ago is higher than my salary today. Was higher than what I only earn today in the public sector. So, of a truth, I can tell you that wages in the public sector generally, I mean, with a few exceptions, there's some outliers, but generally are low. However, and that's what I find missing in the discussions about salary in the public sector. Productivity is also low. I've been on both sides, so I know what I'm talking about, in most parts of the public sector, it's a question of 30 days make a paycheck. Just real value of what you this. I started my career with Pricewaterhouse, firm of chartered accountants. In Pricewaterhouse, every month you fill a timesheet that documents the hours of work you have put in on client, whatever, which is billable on the client. They say value that whatever this thing there, and without that timesheet documenting that you've delivered this whatever, you will not get paid. We have equivalents of such in the public sector. And so it's possible for people actually not to show up at work at all and still get paid. So we can't run away. I've been in a few meetings with labor. When you bring up the productivity question, I mean, people get dismissive about it as if it's not something to be, to be talked about. But we must, have some standards for measuring output, productivity. And on that basis, if we focus on it, and also, as I said earlier, align the objectives of, if we, the NSC president hit the nail on the head. The problem is not our high, our personnel cost only looks high because, our revenues are too low.
Okay, let's just take this call out.
But the only problem is he says that the workers are victims, as if the workers have no part in raising the level of revenues, and that's where we part ways, because I believe that it's the workers, just like happens in the private sector.
Okay, let's take this caller from Kaduna, Buba. Hello, Buba.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Good evening. Go ahead, Buba.
Yeah, I just want to ask the NLC president that he has forgotten that the value of Naira as it has, as today, that has been dwindling, that make our works valueless. So in gone are the days when Adam Oshomole had been, whenever there is any hike on the petroleum, he protest. Now,
can they raise the volume? Well, it looks as though the radio is challenged tonight. We can't hear you clearly, but quickly, a couple of tweets have come in. Let's take them, then we'll take the remaining reports and go into conclusion. Are we sure Professor Kenny is still on? Okay. Quickly, beginning with the first tweets coming from at Mostly. We will take this into it. Improving the quality of lives of public servants will not necessarily disrupt government expenditure profile. If well articulated, will improve revenue generation and qualitative spending. Maybe allow you to react to that.
I agree. That's essentially the point that both the NLC president and myself have made. But we have to then agree to that, and we have to then, basically, set the targets. And it's got to be, targets sound like a dirty word because maybe in some of the banks even, but that's how the private sector gets productivity out of people, measurable targets. And actually, as we said, for some jobs, they're not involved in revenue, but they're involved in delivering service. So it's got to be a minimum level, a volume, a quantity of service that you deliver every month, which has an economic value, and on the basis of which you get remunerated. And related to that, I'm one of those who, when it comes to minimum wage, I don't believe in minimum wage that is a flat amount per month.
And that's the president is here.
Yes, I know. And I didn't agree with, people didn't agree. I think we should start figuring a minimum wage on an hourly basis. So that means two people who are earning minimum wage, if it's set on an hourly basis, if one of them is only prepared to put in 4 hours work and go back to his yard and go and be gisting, and the other person is prepared to put in 12 days, 12 hours a day work, that person will earn more.
Okay. Let's take the next tweets, and I think the next 3 tweets are directed at the DG, National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission. First, at Emeka says, is the public service bloated? At Adamu says, harmonization of salary structure should not be a standalone policy, but part of a public service reform strategy within the context of a sustainable development vision of Nigeria. The third one, at Idris, what are the main factors in determining salaries? I'll allow you to react to that before we go to other ones.
Is the public service bloated?
Yes.
That would be something if you step into, say, a secretariat and you see people loafing around, and it gives you that impression that the place is bloated. But I link productivity and service to service conditions under which people work. If you're in the Federal Secretariat and you have 11 floors and the lift is not working, and you have to traverse all 11 floors through the staircase, by the time you are arriving on the 11th floor, you need to take a breather for, depending if you took breakfast and what time and where you live, you need to take a breather for quite some time, or sometimes you're downstairs. I have also seen situations where public conveniences are not in good working condition. And so if you need to use the public convenience and you have to calm down, that would also give you the impression. But it's not the worker I'm holding responsible. It's the person who has kept that condition in a situation where a willing worker is ready to work, but is not given the tools and the right environment to carry out the proper processes. And the gentleman from NECA raised an issue which ties into this particular issue you have highlighted.
Yes.
You must have a comprehensive job evaluation before you even talk about harmonization. If you don't have a job description for every worker, then the impression that will be created would be that the service is bloated. At the local government levels, maybe because employment in some of the local governments, when I had to do investigations, have to do with, let me just give these people a job and take them off the streets without creating what they're coming to do. So for there is no private sector where a worker is not tied to a specific job description. So as you're going to work, you know exactly what you're going to do. And what we have missed out in this discussion so far is performance measurement. Private sector, he mentioned part of that. But in the public sector, what we've been running for decades is the annual performance evaluation report. And you know how it's filled. You feel it at the end of the year. How many times have you come to work? What did you do and all that? I'm beginning to see a reversal because in an organization where I worked, every fortnight, you have to write and state exactly what you've done, which would be the basis of your promotion, would be the basis of rewarding you. And in that organization, if you are not given a job by your supervisor, you go to him and say, look, what am I going to write next week if you don't give me work? He is the one who is coming to you that I've not been given assignments to do. So if you reverse that, which I think the head of service of the Federation civil service of the Federation is trying to implement now, you see a marked change where the onus is on you to prove what you have done. I don't really think the service is bloated. What I think is that people are not adequately assigned to duties and clear-cut functions given to people.
Okay. Can you touch on the issue of what are the main factors in determining salaries, in brief?
In brief, it's the demand and supply issue that everybody has talked about. Scarce skills will attract more. Your qualification, years of service in a particular environment, the sector you belong to, and what value you're bringing into the system. Are you not worried that with the current federal government directives that people on grade level 12 and below should stay at home? Are we studying the effect on, is it going to improve the economy? If this situation is going to continue, shouldn't we be thinking of how to engage these persons who are at home? What new skills, what new training we should be giving to them so that they continue to perform their functions online with the job. I mean, it's no magic. Most of the outsourced services in public relations in the US is being performed in India. They don't live in the US. So I'm worried that if we allow this very vibrant sector of the civil service to just stay and we don't begin to train them on online deliveries, the revenue we're trying to shore up might have some issues. Because in my own organization, I've designed processes where they're being trained to take on their jobs at home. We're trying to get them equipment that will assist in that direction. And then the last question was?
The last one was harmonization of salary structure should not be a standalone policy, but part of public service reform.
It is not. It's not a standalone process. You must put it on comprehensive job evaluations.
Okay. President NLC, there are about 3 or 4 here for you. Maybe just react to them quickly so that we take on other ones. Joyce says, since wages affect employees' productivity, why can't the government improve workers' welfare? At Charity, under which conditions does skill-based pay system work well? At ND, is not harmonizing salary discriminatory and unhealthy in the labor sector? And the last one says, at Chooks, improvement of workers is not based on salaries and wages. Government should look into cheap transportation, housing, and health of workers.
Well, thank you very much.
They're all related.
Yes, they are related. Yes, for a worker to be productive, certainly there are some basic needs and requirements that need to be in place. For instance, a teacher cannot be productive if he has not paid his rent. And all along he's thinking about how to get money to pay his rent. So all of this work together, and we must understand that those issues are symbiotic. If all things being equal, it is expected that a worker that is employed has a schedule. You cannot be employed without a schedule. And therefore that schedule is what will be used to assess your productivity. And I think Labour have actually been supportive of the fact that every worker should be productive. That's a minimum requirement. But that worker also, his needs must be taken care of. And basically, I think we must understand which one comes first. Is it to take care of the needy first and ask him to be productive, or where his needs have not been met and you want him to be productive? It's like a horse. You drive a hungry horse, you know that he will throw you somewhere because he's hungry and therefore he cannot carry the weight that is on him. So I think we must put the two side by side. And we must also look at the best global practice. I think one other issue which I need to reflect, which the chair of Salaries and Wages Commission, there is a standard about how to look at remuneration. And this standard is set by ILO in Convention 26. One is the cost of living, because I said clearly that worker is not a slave. He works to earn a living. And where a worker works and he's not earning a living from it, he can't be productive. So part of the requirement to look at the salary of a worker, including review, is the cost of living index, the purchasing power parity, inflation rates. In some countries, workers don't negotiate. They look at the inflation rate in that country and adjust the wages. In Britain, that's what they do.
Yes.
And therefore, this is the basis to look at a worker's wage. Okay. And therefore, we must situate all of this in the argument we're making. And I think the last person that tried to raise an issue is about the falling value of our currency. I agree with him. The wage in 1981, which was 125 naira, and the wage now, certainly they are miles apart because of the falling value of our currency. And therefore, I agree with him. And that's why each time Labour try to canvass for a review of wages, people will begin to wonder, why are they So it's just to maintain the value so that a worker can also have a dignified life. And all over the world, these are the standards that are set. And that's why we lose most of our best brain in search of greener pastures. Most people that leave the shores of this country, they go because they want to get something. And once they get there, you know that the remittance, which DG can tell us, how much is the remittance from Nigerians that are living abroad? The remittance is so high. Okay, it's because they earn high, yes. They take care of their family there, and they'll be able to send something back home. Okay, but who is suffering? It's our economy that is actually suffering.
The next tweet. And they pay higher taxes. They work harder in those environments than what they want to do here. And if you're looking at inflation rates, our inflation rates, we are talking about double digits. The UK you mentioned, single. We were talking about reviewing, somebody raised the issue of reviewing ESTA code in Nigeria, and then the duty toll allowances. 2008 was when we did the DTA in this country, and so we could review it upwards times 3, times 4. And then they came back and said, look, what about the ESTA code? I say ESTA code is applied when you travel out of this country. And if you go to a hotel in Germany or the UK, it's most likely that the rates that you would pay is what they have been maintaining for the last 10 years.
Okay, let's
cost of living.
Let's take the next tweet, so I don't lose the track of this. There are 2 tweets here I'll take to the acting chairman, then the last one to the DG budget office. It's coming from AM Tanimo. There is a need for yours truly, Mr. Minudan, to take the acting chairman, acting DG Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Allocation, and the deputy director of budget. It's even a director at you, sir. Okay. Director of budget. I think he's referring to you. Maybe he used the wrong nomenclature here. To see souls and on duty after the program, so that they will know NTA staff need special wages. That is a 24 hours routine. How do you? That's a concern by a public person here.
Let me ask you
quickly.
Yes.
We don't have all the time.
Do you deserve more wages?
Everybody deserves a good wage.
You see, this is the issue we've been talking about. Should we have more pay for the NTA guy who is working 12 hours? I looked at the police job. Yes. Officially, you are supposed to do an 8-hour shift. But I looked at the police person. If you insist that the policeman should do 8 hours per shift, most police stations in the country will shut down. So you find these chaps running 12 hours, 24 hours. And if I say, okay, let's remunerate them more, we now say harmonization means equal pay for all civil servants, not for different skills. Those are the issues. I think you deserve more for the number of hours you're putting in, if it's quality work. But if you also give an opportunity to the other person who is doing 8 hours, in fact, the 8 hours he's doing, he might actually be engaged 4 hours. But if you make the conditions such that he's able to deliver more. I will use this example of the 13th month salary that most organizations are claiming to pay. It was on the wrong basis if you think it is a 13th month salary like any other month. It's a bonus to the job you're doing. Targets must be set. If you don't meet those targets, you are not entitled to that 13th month. In fact, right now, I've sent out circulars. If you're running that kind of scheme and you set targets, before you pay, we want to see if you've met those targets. Because some people have become used to not doing anything and earning that. Productivity is the key. And if it's what has run most other societies, to the extent that if a colleague of mine is not working so that I meet that target to be paid, I'm the first one who will go to him and say, my friend, you are dragging us back, and if you're not ready to step up, we'll get you out of our team. That's the kind of service I want to see.
Okay, let me say the remaining ones so that all of them we can react to them. This one coming from Ogunleye Afolabi Adeniyi. We need to operate salary structure that reflects the country economy demand. The next phase of the Nigerian economy will have to focus on multiple sources of income for financial support for the citizens by engaging in skills acquisition. At Buba Yaza, isn't minimum wage matters, isn't harmonized pay too, but the dwindling free frail naira value, the purchasing power is low. Unlike the days when gasoline is the determining factor that what labor protests, but naira value which makes work valueless. Buba Umar Yaza from Kaduna. And the last for now, coming from Omohan. 1. Work in a federal government organization where I work in a federal government organization where we generate almost 21 billion naira, but we are the least paid federal government organization. We are being held years house rent of 10,000 for level 1 to 6. How can I cope, sir?
Yeah, okay. I think those issues are real. And that's why I think it's better to look at those issues holistically instead of addressing them in silos, because Absolutely. They are actually connected. I think also the issue of basing the pay of some organization on the fact that they generate revenue, I'm not sure that basis is also correct. We should have the minimum basis, and then we can have some criteria that can actually add up, like we have, because I used to make reference to the health sector because I come from the health sector. I think in the health sector we can have some basis. Then you have peculiar allowances that is peculiar to some rare fields professionals, which is what we used to have as far back as 1991. When you have a general salary, then you have people from rare fields, and those fields are listed. Take, for instance, a neurosurgeon. It's a rare field.
Yes.
That you need to pay even to get him to do the work. So this is how I think productivity should be measured and people should be compensated. But there's the minimum basis, which takes care of the cost of living, the purchasing power, the inflation rate. These are the basis. Then you can then look at people that are in rare fields, and on the basis of demand and supply, you can be able to address some of those issues. This is how economies around the world actually perform. And with globalization, it's possible for you to be here and you are working for a company in South Africa. And many Nigerians, with globalization and with the digital economy that is now driving the process of the fourth industrial revolution, that is already taking place. So how do we fit into these changes that are happening in the world of work and also return our best and be a leading economy in the world and also competing? You must have a public service that is effective.
Okay.
That is also working effectively.
But before you speak, I was surprised for you to say that, for instance, the NTA does not generate revenue. NTA generates revenue.
I didn't say so. I said you generate revenues and you are allowed to retain and spend all of the revenues you
Absolutely.
generate. That's what I said.
Okay.
Okay. But you see, you keep bringing this and they have to say it's not about NTA. But you talked about NTA.
Yeah, the salary structure is very low actually. It's too low.
Whatever.
It's too low.
And I have no doubt that compared, your salaries compared to that which some of your competitors, the private TV stations pay, that you're probably paid much lower. But you know what? Check your payroll, your nominal role vis-a-vis those people. And especially in NTA, staff who are not, this is a news organization. The staff
not just news, broadcast organization.
The broadcast organization. Check your non-core people who are involved in your non-core activity. You probably have multiples of what those people, and ultimately, there's a finite amount that is available. That's how this thing happens. If you carry more people than you actually need to do the work, you can't pay as well as you should. So that's a real issue. I know that because I've looked at it. And then, someone talked about revenue generating. He or she didn't say which agency it is.
Yes.
But I think that this term, revenue generating agencies, is one that we need to interrogate. There are a number of agencies of government, where all that happens is by some legislation. The legislation mandates that a certain percentage of certain flows should go to them, be credited to them. And they sit down and they call themselves revenue generating agencies. Nobody lifts a finger for that revenue to come. It's credited to their whatever. And you have people who hit the street and they have to work to earn, and there's some correlation between the effort they put and those revenues. We need to make those kinds of distinctions when we talk about who is a revenue generating agency. There's a question you ask: is the Nigerian public service bloated, and especially the public, the federal government? My answer is no, and it's on an empirical basis. Okay, if you take our population, you take the total number of the workers as a percentage of the population, and compare to some of those countries that we consider this thing, our percentage is lower. The problem with our own case is that we have too many people. We have too many people in the wrong jobs and not enough people in the right jobs. As the president of the LLC said, we probably need double the number of policemen that we have currently. But there are many people doing non-value adding admin jobs. That but look, Ethiopia, less than half of our population, less than half of our arable land. As of 5 years ago, they had 45,000 extension service workers in their agri sector. That's why the agri sector is so productive, a key factor. Today in Nigeria, I don't think we have more than 10,000, despite our whatever. And yet, if you go to the ministry, the place would be full of people. A lot of those guys should be out in the field as extension workers. That's how they will generate the productivity that enables us to pay better. There's also the persistent correlation of our pay to the dollar equivalent. But it's not that straightforward. There's something we call purchasing power parity, and the president, when else, he knows all about it because he cited it.
Yeah.
On a purchasing power parity basis. So, for instance, you can say our minimum wage, 30,000 naira is $60. The truth of the matter is what 30,000 naira can fetch you, can buy you here, $60 cannot buy that for you in those economies. So you've got to reduce this to a purchasing parity basis before you compare wages across countries like that. The other point I wanted to make is, I believe that as a general rule, we need, if we're going to address corruption, we need to pay our public service workers, and perhaps we should start looking at the Singaporean model.
Okay.
When you desire to fight, corruption, one of the approaches was, we will pay in the public sector just as well for equal work in the public sector. You will earn as much as they earn in the private sector. So you have no incentive, you have no justification to be corrupt. And so if we catch you in corruption, we deal with you, but we'll also extract, productivity, from you. I think that, that's something that we need to begin, because otherwise we think that we're fighting corruption and we're paying people this sort of whatever salaries. A director, 30 years plus in service, is still going home with less than 400,000 naira. If we are fighting corruption, the joke will be on us, as a country. So we need to basically look at this.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, just a few seconds in conclusion for wrap up.
Well, I think this subject matter is very interesting. It's very timely, but I think, as I said earlier, those issues are interconnected. Wages, productivity, and importantly, what is the responsibility of government in providing quality public service? Essentially, those things have to be connected as we grapple with the challenge of paucity of funds, but importantly also is recognize the fact that we are not operating in isolation. Despite the challenge, we have workers that are put in their best and they are very productive.
Thank you very much.
So basically we must recognize all of this.
At this point, I must say we come to the end of Tuesday Live tonight. We looked at